Well, we're blessed to have a really special guest today. Someone I got to see on TV on the program Unidentified, is where I saw him, and I saw him in other interviews. His name is Sean Cahill. He's retired U.S. Navy Chief Master at Arms. He's a filmmaker, he's an investigator, and he has been at the forefront of perhaps what is one of the biggest stories in the world right now, which is the recently released videos over the last few years involving what the government calls unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP, what we in the hinterlands call UFOs. So it's a great privilege to have you on with us, Sean. Welcome to our program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And of course, we have with us as well our chief science advisor and physicist, Dr. Yu, who joins me as well here we want to focus on your observations, your experiences, and let that speak for itself. And then we'll get into looking at possibly some of the scientific explanations for what may be observed here.
Outstanding.
So let's start off with the basics. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into this situation.
Well, in 2004, I was stationed on board the USS Princeton as the Chief Master at Arms, which for most people would equate to being the sheriff on board the ship. I was in an unusual position in that I was standing watch on the bridge, which is not usually a watch station for the Chief Master at Arms, but my department head was the navigator, and he had a hole in his watch bill at that time, and he'd asked me if I'd be willing to come up and fill that hole for him. And he thought that it might help me with an advancement, since we were on a platform that really concerned itself with delivering missiles to target. And since if you weren't involved with that, you weren't as competitive as the other sailors on board. So I thought that was a good idea, and I could also learn to navigate the ship and learn to use a sextant and other things. And since I had wanted to get a sailboat later in life, I thought it was a good idea. So I ended up on the bridge to help at the time when we were coordinating efforts to determine whether or not the tic-tac, as we call it now, was a real target, or whether or not this was a ghost track or something that was occurring within the Spy 1B and Aegis system. So over the course of a few days, I helped Senior Chief Kevin Day down in the Combat Information Center on board the USS Princeton coordinate ship movements so that we could put the ship on a proper vector to ensure that we were triangulating these things right. We were trying to make it as basic as possible. In the meantime, there were technicians like Gary Voorhees that were running back and forth, rebooting the entire system, which is nothing like rebooting your home computer. It's quite an extensive reboot. But they went through heck, really, to find out whether these were real or not. And finally, at one point, Kevin went to our captain and said, "Sir, I think these are real tracks, and I think that we should sortie some F-18s out to go check them out." Being the air defense commander, we had the authority to do that. So we told Nimitz, "Send your jets out there to look." And Commander Fravor and his wingman pilot, Lieutenant Commander Dietrich, went out there, and they encountered these things. And their descriptions are pretty impressive. Later on, I found myself off the port bridge wing with one of my lookouts, and we saw 5 to 7 objects up in the sky that turned towards a center point. And they all blinked out within a very short period of time. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was unlike anything the lookout had ever seen before. And but frankly, it was just an eyewitness account of something strange. And after we saw the gun camera footage and everything else, I think it got lost in the mix.
And the gun camera footage is what's been released to the public. Is that right? From Nimitz, the Nimitz encounter?
That's correct. And it was very compelling footage. Even the next day, when we saw it, you can actually hear an F-18 sortie going over my house right now, if you can hear it in the background. When we saw that footage, we saw movement and characteristics unlike anything we'd ever seen before. And this was years before any of us had ever heard of the 5 observables that had matriculated out of ATIP with Luis Elizondo. But at the time, we knew that what we were seeing had no control surfaces, no obvious means of propulsion. It wasn't radiating as a hot object properly. And finding out that it had arrived at Lieutenant Commander Fravor's cap point ahead of time was actually very chilling at that point, because we couldn't figure out how this thing had beat us to our own punch, so to speak.
So what does that mean? It went back to the cap point? Is that what you said?
Yes, essentially what that means is that our air defense commander, the USS Princeton, or whoever had control of the aircraft at the time, which was probably Princeton, had given Commander Fravor a coordinate and an order to go to a specific point. Now, an F-18 travels at a certain max velocity and speed, et cetera. So there's a time period, as most of us are used to, between point A and point B. Well, as soon as the order was given to Commander Fravor to go from point A to point B, the Tic Tac went to point B. And it was waiting there for the sortie ahead of time. And actually, Senior Chief Day, I believe, is one of the people that his testimony is that he was incredulous when they were trying to tell Commander Fravor, sir, the object has already arrived at your cap point.
How many, what was the distance and what would the speed have been to get to that point as soon as it arrived?
Pardon me for speculating. I'm trying to remember more than a decade back, but I want to say it was around 70 to 80 miles. And I can't do the math off the top of my head, but even a F-18 that was already moving at Mach 1 would have taken at least a noticeable amount of time to transit that. For the quote unquote Tic Tac to have transited that almost immediately indicates a hypersonic velocity and an instantaneous acceleration, which those are two of the 5 observables right there. And the fact that we already noticed that it had no means of propulsion, et cetera, it exhibited exotic technology even back in 2004.
Now, we spoke with the physicist Michio Kaku recently about this issue, and he mentioned the possibility of it being hypersonic, drones. Is that something that, well, based on your observations and the data you're referring to, could have fit that description?
That's very interesting. And I find that to be such an easy place to say that it's a mistake, only for the fact that to about 300 to 400 miles north at the exact, and people will find a conflation in this. I'm sure people will take an exit immediately and make conclusions. Mm-hmm. But hundreds of miles to the north, we were testing a hypersonic scramjet out of, I believe, Edwards Air Force Base. Now, at the time, this was, I think it was the X-37, possibly, but someone would have to check my my nomenclature on that. But this was it was a scramjet that was dropped from the bottom of a larger aircraft, and then it would ignite at speed and it would take off. And we lost that test bed in the ocean at that time. Now, if you're out to sea, I don't want anyone to assume that what we were looking at was the same thing. We're hundreds of miles away, around the curvature of the Earth, outside the realm of possibility of even visualizing this thing, and beyond the fact that it doesn't exhibit the same characteristics whatsoever that we saw with the Tic Tac. However, what it does tell us is that at the time that we were testing, technology was that at the farthest end of what we were looking at with Tic Tac, the Tic Tac was dancing around our F-18s and our battle group. And I don't want anybody to have their minds blown, but what I'm saying is while we were testing a Betamax VCR 300 miles north, someone was down south running 4K video at an amazing stream rate. And the technology difference there between the best that the Department of Defense and Edwards Air Force Base and DARPA had 300 miles north versus what was dancing around Commander Fravor is so ridiculous that for us to keep conflating where we are in 2021 to where we were in 2004 is a waste of a lot of our time.
Now, this incident occurred off the coast of Mexico. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a good triangle from where I am here to Ensenada to kind of go like this to where our operations area was. If you were to look at a map of San Diego and the Southern California area, we call it the SoCal Op area. Mm-hmm. And it's located past the Channel Islands, where most of the pleasure craft and cruise ships and other things would operate in their shipping lanes. We're slightly out of that. We can operate hot out there, and we have some places where we can land munitions as well.
And the program that you were in with Lou Elizondo, the former director of ATIP, which was the program responsible for investigating the unidentified aerial phenomenon topic in the Pentagon, and he resigned, I guess, in protest in 2017, correct? And so you were in this program Unidentified on TV, and you guys went down there, and you said that some of the locals, the fishermen and stuff, were reporting similar objects. Is that right?
Yes, I just want to make sure that we don't confuse anyone. I was in the television program Unidentified, but I was not a part of the program ATIP with the government. So just so nobody confuses those two things. But yes, Luis and I went down to Ensenada and then on to Guadalupe Island on a secondary mission out there. And the eyewitness testimony that we received from the fishermen on the mainland, from the service workers up and down the wharf and at the hotels, and also from the indigenous, well, I shouldn't say indigenous because they come from the mainland, but the fishermen who live out on Guadalupe Island year round, was quite impressive. It was quite compelling, and it speaks of a very different environment that most of us are used to.
And different in what way?
Well, some of the fishermen, for example, on Guadalupe Island had spoke of what some of us who are studying this in the last few years might call, in the daylight, we might call them silver basketballs. That's what I like to call them. They seem to be silver spheroids in the daylight. In the nighttime, they seem, if we're looking at the same objects, they seem to present as different colors. And we have various reasons to speculate why they might be different colors. But the fishermen down around Guadalupe Island are seeing these objects rise up out of the water at distance to them while they're collecting their lobster pots, etc. And then these objects would immediately translate very close to them, and intimidatingly close, like as close as my ring light is here. And they would say that it would almost regard them. They said it was almost, in some ways, it was like an eyeball that was checking them out. And then it would immediately translate, like there was a motion to it, but they didn't see it again. So they knew that it took off in a specific direction. And we kept hearing this from more than one person. And then we kept hearing things about what they would see when they were out fishing underneath the water. Some of the stuff we were hearing was quite spectacular. But it really talks about a different environment than what we're seeing within our shipping lanes and in and around the coastal areas of our cities.
And is there a reason why that area had such a hot spot of appearances?
I don't feel like it would be skillful for me to talk about that. It would just be my own speculation and that of other authors and researchers. I tend to lean towards evidentiary value. So if it's not in a governmental report or peer review, or at least by an entity that I can give you follow-on data, I don't want to quote it too much. But there is a feeling, if you don't mind me saying that, when I spoke to all of the people that I did to south of the border, that this is something that is more understood and expected in and around areas south of the United States. Mexico, Central America, and South America seem to have a different philosophy in regards to parts of this phenomenon.
I want to turn it over to Dr. Yu if you got any questions.
Yes, thank you. You are very eloquent. And you described so many things. So I just try to ask you, see, if these could be mistaken phenomenon. So let you to explain why it is not. So you don't think there's any non-man-made natural objects, something.
Well, I think that as far as natural objects go, we have to be ready to accept the possibility that some people put that into a category that I believe they call ultra-terrestrial, that perhaps there is a species or a phenomena here that is resident to Earth that we don't have a full understanding with, that we live in concert with, but that we're just starting to notice. I feel that is a possibility. Are there prosaic explanations for some of these things? I think absolutely. If we're if we're dragging our hands through all of the data, a great deal of the eyewitness testimony and past testimony, I think, will fall into prosaic categories. But when we find objects that are operating with what I call a triangulation of evidence, eyewitness testimony, camera footage, and electromagnetic or radar data, we have a different picture now, because we don't have to wonder as much as to what happened. Because if we can see these things operating at hypersonic velocities with instantaneous acceleration, and if we can observe them using some means of low observability, as well as transmedium travel, some of these objects seem to be going from atmosphere into water with no discernible change in mode of the medium. And I think you and I both know that there's a bow wave and a shock wave that precedes something in the atmosphere, and that should translate as it enters into the hydrosphere. And it makes one even wonder, could they then transit into the lithosphere as well, if they have that control of density of matter and atmosphere? So we're talking about a very esoteric technology. So where we observe something that looks like a spoof of an adversary, or perhaps a natural phenomenon, I think we need to be prepared to identify that. But when we do encounter the 5 observables, this truly exotic technology, we need to be able to say that we have encountered that as well.
Okay, so you basically just explained it cannot be psychological effect, right? You have a different instruments and the collaboration eyewitness, so cannot be psychological effect, and also cannot be the optical effect in the atmosphere,
because you saw this with your own eyes, right? This is not just something you saw in the measurements, right?
Well, that's correct, but there's no on the record report of my sighting. My sighting comes years later. As an investigator, I don't place a great deal of stock in my own personal sighting. When I'm on the phone with people trying to connect folks and get this story out there and to expand the conversation, I'm the last person that I suggest for this, because the pilots who had the gun camera footage and who encountered it in their means, we have a better understanding of what they saw. To me, I saw 5 to 7 lights, but it's
how long did you see? How long was your sighting in total? 30 seconds or?
Oh, less than 12.
And
it was very fast.
Was it? How far out in the sky was it? It
was approximately 2,000 feet, about 45 degrees off the port bow, and it's very strange because, and I've discussed this with friends and family, but I always do the same thing. My hand comes up, my fingers go out, and then I turn them like this when I describe it. But it was, see, I don't want to get too weird, but people talk a lot about feeling like they should walk outside and look up and see something. Kevin called me on the phone. Kevin, the Senior Chief Kevin Day, called me from the Combat Information Center and actually made a plea to me. Would you please go outside? Would you please take this very seriously? Would you talk to your lookouts, and would you ask them to specifically look for contacts, for air contacts? And I was a little exasperated, and I was like, okay, Kevin, yeah, I'll go do that. And I immediately, kind of frustrated, walked out on the port bow and closed the hatch and started scanning the horizon with my binoculars. And that was when I turned to the right off the port bow and saw the lights. So it was, there were 5 or 7 of them, and they were about right up there. So right off the port bow, right. And the thing is you've got the ensign, we call it it's a flag that's on the ensign's on the stern, but there's a flag right there, and you can see right where the center line is. And I saw them right at about 45 degrees at around 2,000 feet. And we're trained to gauge these things. It's kind of a reflex to gauge altitude and distance, but they all were moving at the same time towards the center. So almost in a spiral pattern, but one would move towards the center and it would disappear. I pushed my finger out like that because I had a feeling, an idea that they were moving in that direction because I didn't see anything come my way, but I can't know that. 5 to 7 of them, though, as they all went towards the center, they disappeared. And I turned to the gentleman next to me and I said, did you see, we were saltier language, we were on deck, but I said, did you effing see that? And he said, yeah, Chief, I effing saw that. And his jaw was on the ground. And we kind of sat there for a minute, but then I went back inside and I didn't call Kevin. He wasn't on watch at the time. It wasn't relevant to the anti-submarine exercise we were performing in and around the islands. And I don't recall what it was that got my attention, but I didn't think about it again until I got up in the morning and actually saw the gun camera footage.
Is that the footage that we have, or I heard, isn't there a better, clearer video that we haven't seen in the public?
A lot of people have said that before. I've never seen a more clear video. Now, there's a 1:30 or so video that's as far as I know, the entire FLIR 1 gun camera footage, as they call it, from the Tic Tac incident. What we got on Princeton was a shorter version. It had a different name. It was something around the date. It was like November 14 something. And yeah, I have a weird memory for that. But I also remember all the emails that came with it too, because it was Lieutenant Commander Teresa Elders, our operations officer, as well as the operations officer on Nimitz, over the course of many days discussing the fact that this could be temperature inversions, seagulls, mylar balloons. They pulled out every prosaic explanation as they could before we ever got around to calling these unidentified. So it was, please.
Is this the same incident where they said, I heard that there were submarine records of this taking observations?
So I don't know what other sources there are of that. I've had personal conversations with folks that were the sonar techs who were on board my ship. I've had conversations with them in the last couple of years. They're not interested in coming forward, the two of them I've spoken to, but according to them and according to friends of mine who served in senior capacities up around the DEW line during the Cold War, the defensive line we have, or the early warning network, in ballistic missile submarines. As far as all the submariners go that I know and the sonar techs, this is something that's probably even more well known as USOs, as unidentified submersible objects, than they are as UFOs, because the sonar data is pretty solid. But from what I'm told, and this is going to really tick people off, the sonar technicians are told to log it and dog it. And that means don't put it in the log. Dogging something means to line it back out. So it's kind of a misnomer to put it in and line it out. So they don't even report it, from what I'm told, most times. Now, I hope that's changed, because I would imagine that with the advent or the end of the Cold War, supercavitating torpedoes and other things like that have made it impossible to ignore hypersonic movers underwater, so to speak.
Now, what happened now? You said that they, if I recall, you say that they kind of dismissed it and you were upset about that, right?
Yes. Well, when I say dismissed it, we had an operations and intelligence briefing that night that was pretty much status quo. We made a small joke at the beginning in the PowerPoint of a little Mars attacks type alien going across the screen. And the captain said, well, everybody had their fun. Let's get back to work. And that actually, when I say it, it ticked me off. It part of me lost the magic I felt in the universe at that point.
And the magic was what you had all your life, or from seeing that eyewitness event? What do you mean by that?
Well, no, it was what I'd had all my life up until that point. I mean, I still maintained my love for science and evidentiary value and wanting to understand the universe, but I had personally stopped kind of reaching beyond the math, if that makes sense. The way that my chain of command reacted to that was it was boring. I knew what I saw in that video. So did Kevin, so did some of the other guys. Now, the other guys, that when I say other guys, they were convinced they were looking at a DARPA project. And later, that next day, a couple of days later, I was convinced we were looking at a DARPA project as well. Having met Luis after 2017, I know that we weren't, because the entire program that he ran had part of its genesis in our incident. Senator Reid and Inouye and others partially formed ATIP and OSAP because of what happened out there. It's a very hard message to get across to folks that while this has been filled with BS for 70 years, it has existed for 70 years. And while numerous other programs have shut down, they kept restarting and reappearing and being stovepiped. And research continued. The science that we want to extrapolate out of this BS phenomenon that people think of has been extrapolated for quite a long time now. It is the cutting edge of our science. We are trying to emulate exactly what we're seeing. It's time for us to admit that we're seeing that and open source the emulation of that technology, I think.
You mentioned the 70 years of these reports. Is there any indication of, in your research, of military eyewitness reports that describe the type of objects that you saw, or are these a new model of whatever's coming? Is, maybe before they saw a Model T, now we're up to a nice little Chrysler minivan. Or, it's the evolution of vehicles.
Right.
There's some kind of evolution in vehicles that's been demonstrated.
I've found that there's two ways to look at that. On the one hand, we have reports of what are called gas cans or propane cans or Tic Tacs or cigars that go back almost all the way into antiquity. If we're going to be real about this goes back past 70 years, but I don't have evidence that I can stand upon that's less than 70 years old. But on the other hand, please excuse me, I didn't lock my dog up. On the other hand, there is a portion of this that it does seem like when we update our radar suites, that's when we have another flap. So that happened with we had upgraded our systems in 2004 when we encountered the Tic Tac, and in 2015 when Roosevelt was encountering these systems off of the East Coast, we had done a similar radar upgrade. So the question is why does their technology just trail ahead of us on the electromagnetic spectrum detectionally? I mean, there's a lot we could probably extrapolate out of that, but I wouldn't want to guess too much.
So is there any, well, go ahead, Dr. Yu. I'm going to think about how to formulate this next question.
Oh, okay. So basically you described by the way observation, by multiple means observation, it cannot be psychological, cannot be optical illusion because of different means and something. So you basically, so based on the description, it is some kind of a intelligent object, so some kind driving by some intelligence. Is that right? The object?
I would agree with that statement in that we have a modern understanding that artificial intelligence could carry out a complex mission without a biological actor. Yes.
Which I would believe if in the future we have an intergalactical traveling, I believe it could becomes robotic. So those artificial intelligence can accomplish something if assuming they are much more advanced than us, right? So I said,
I would completely agree.
Yeah, without binding with biological water, food consumption, right? So that's very reasonable for me. Another thing is you said that the tic-tac shape. I saw one video. It's used infrared and show very much disc, the bulging disc, traditional UFO type shape. So the tic-tac shape is so you think it's not like the orientation, just based on shape wise. So they're different objects.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. I'm holding my my headphone case, which if I hold it like this is very much a tic-tac shape. I understand that if I change aspect, we have different aspect.
Then you have an oval shape. Yes.
Yes, and so the radar data and the observational data of the pilots returns to us that this was a actual tic-tac shape, and we weren't seeing a change in aspect or a dimensional perceptive change, if that makes sense.
Yes, I have the pictures with me. Looks like the geometrically significant difference. So based on the object shape, is that a smooth some kind of a non-natural object. Is that right?
I'm curious. I'm curious, Doctor. Are you saying that you feel that the shape changes in the video?
No. I'm talking about the object is smooth, like a man-made. It's not like a natural shape.
Yes. So recently, I believe it was Lieutenant Commander Dietrich who was saying that it had a matte finish, that the entire Tic Tac had a it was not glossy, it had a matte finish.
Some texture.
Yes, in texture. But when determining natural versus artificial, I don't know that if any of us could have done that with something that's so vague. If I've never seen a natural Tic Tac 30 feet long.
How did he see it in a matte? How did he see the matte finish? What was this? He was so close to it.
I can't say how close they got. I would say that if well, I know that I can tell the difference between a glossy finish and a matte finish of a helicopter from quite a distance. So I would say that I do understand why they would say the difference between that. I don't want to give the idea that it was pockmarked at all or that it had a texture so much to it, but I would say maybe the albedo or the reflectiveness of the object was less than, I don't have the right words here, but it wasn't so much reflective as it was a matte white finish.
What is the likely propulsion system in your opinion?
Well,
so I have
to lean towards the defense intelligence research documents there. They tend to investigate what are called metamaterials. They tend to investigate very high energetic systems of power generation. I don't want to speculate too far because I am just an investigator and law enforcement officer. I would leave that up to you with no sarcasm intended. But we're looking at something here that seems to hearken towards a more exotic end of the electromagnetic spectrum, let me say. A portion of our physics that we don't currently have mastery over, but we do seem to be glimpsing the edges of.
Yes, that's the likely scenario, in my opinion, is also electromagnetic phenomenon. And so usually if it's an electromagnetic propulsion, you may not observe physical rotation or something. And there's no sound, just like an electrical car, right? It's very quiet, yes, no sound, no exhaust plume, something. It could be some kind of rotation or some motion of an electromagnetic field interaction. Yes, and another thing I wanted to so you said that there's no control surface. So seems like the object is very, very the simplest pattern. It's not like a very fancy man-made object, right?
I would agree with you that it does exhibit an indication that it is a perhaps complex theoretical system, but perhaps a simple physical system. I find that very intriguing that you see that as well. The idea to me is that in some ways it would appear that these objects are independent of our movement. So the question is, are they stationary and we're moving, or vice versa? I find that theoretically, when we start talking about these things with semantics, that the quantum nature of this provides us a lot of room to talk about. I wish I had more of the math to keep up, but there's some really interesting ideas about how they maintain station in relation to the rest of us. Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about so if it's intelligent driving this object, so biological being cannot sustain more than say normal, let's say we say 9 Gs or something. Otherwise, you will lost conscious and you cannot control or even pass out, right? And from the physical materials, so I read somewhere say even F-16, reach what is the like 16 G or something, some kind of structure failure will happen, right? Mm-hmm. So So that means the structure should be very symmetrical, very smooth, should not have like wings or little tails come out, something in order to sustain. This is what is 500 to 600 Gs, something at that moment. So that point to me some kind of, say, robotic operations, artificial intelligence operate the structure. So without food or water supply.
I would tend to agree with you. I don't believe that a payload or a biological entity, let alone anything beyond an extremely robust solid state interior system, would survive instantaneous acceleration. But that does bring up other questions as to whether or not we're still dealing with Newtonian physics in these instances, or should we lean towards more considering about the effects of gravity and time on the local environment, and if these objects may possess their own gravitic field.
That's you opened another dimension. Yes, traditional Newtonian may not be able to explain. So what I was thinking about this is has to be electromagnetic phenomenon, because in my physical study, the only fundamental force in the universe is the electromagnetic force. I would call the magnetic force. Just say moving, just time varying of magnetic field. So the fundamental force has to be electromagnetic force. So that's what I'm thinking. The second thing, when I ask you the simple shape and very simple device, I try to gauging if it has a special power system, complex, like we have engines, have all the kind of power systems, or it's purely based on solid state of a material. And
that's an excellent question. Please continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because of the simplicity. So I would think about it, if you carry power, so how much, say, nuclear, so far we know nuclear materials, right? How much nuclear fuels you can have in order to generate the electromagnetic field. You need some energy, right? So that's what I'm thinking. So this is basically the point to me of my theoretical conclusion is there exists called anti-gravity technology. It has to be. One thing, whenever we're talking about anti-gravity, people think about gravity is only attraction force. How could you come out with anti-gravity? They think about probably somebody is crazy, right? But that's not from my theoretical derivation comes out is so-called gravity, in my understanding theory, is only a magnetic attraction force. So gravity is not a fundamental force. So the so-called we see gravitational attraction, include the Earth's orbit of the sun, it's a magnetic attraction. And people would say, well, why we say gravitational is the only attraction? If a magnetic attraction, you would have a repulsion. I said, wait a minute. If under free rotation, free constraint state, when you have two magnets, you have a free state. What happens? It automatically rotates because magnetic movement create a rotation arm. So that's why it will rotate, and always the end result and the state is always a track. So the reason I explained this one, if we consider gravity force is just part of a magnetic attraction. So now we can justify why we can have anti-gravity, because magnetic not only have attraction, it also have repulsion. People say, do you have evidence for that one? I said, yes, we do. That's what the superconductivity, you can tell. Superconducting, just material. The superconducting material made by the ceramic and the real earth material. It's not a purely metal conducting material, right? Under super cold, nearly absolute zero degree, you put the magnets, it's levitation, it's floating, right? So that's what the superconducting material. Why the floating? Because the superconducting material under supercold generate a magnetic repulsion force. So that's what I think. So based on the existence of superconductivity, so I would assuming it would exist of anti-gravity because it's still the same magnetic phenomenon. So in your case, you said it can fly in the air almost instant speed, right? So where comes that? There's such a big force. If you reverse gravity, just like gravity can accelerate and also can accelerate, from you, right? And also why it also works not only in air and under the water, because water can also generate, gravity, magnetic field also goes through the water. So I'm not surprised. The things can fly in space too.
Let me ask you, Doctor, what do you think fundamentally the rest of us are missing? Because I find that the way that you describe that and the way that you describe its origin to be in a perhaps an area of magnetism that we don't have mastery of yet. But I like the idea that if you'll pardon me for speculating wildly across the board for the moment,
sure.
If we were to apply that to a multiverse idea, it would then immediately explain the absolute strange spectrum of what people visualize and what they see when they encounter these things, because they do visualize all manner of technological advancement. Some people see Buck Rogers type spaceships, and some people see steampunk type dirigibles, and other people are seeing flying saucers. It makes me wonder if this technology is so very room temperature that it's being developed all across the multiverse, and we're just seeing the other iterations of us popping in and out looking at us.
That could be a very popular explanation for multiverse in the theoretical physics, like a Michio Kaku. Okay, that's what his string theory predict multiverse. For me, multiverse and our parallel universe, a big bang from the collide, what is the collide of the membranes. You will never ever find any evidence for that one. Number one. So it's all purely speculation. So I do not believe that's in the science arena. That belongs to science fiction. You said that's what Michio Kaku said, just like you said. Okay, you think about it. You are in that.
I'm an interlocutor. I just communicate ideas a lot of times. I don't have the math, so I have to rely on you.
Yes, but for me, I do not believe it needs to go to this is a multi-dimension, parallel universe. If we can explain just within our three space dimension and the time, use logic. If we can explain, so there is no need to go through this kind of parallel universe. Those kind of, I believe that's a scientific fiction, or it's more faith-based or completely faith-based. You would never ever get the evidence. It's only stretching whatever you observe. You observe that, you're stretching. Oh, this could be a bubble universe, something. So that's why I think in that sense, I'm gonna dismiss I'm not consider that's a real case, since you observed is not a virtual case, right? You observed is a physical object. So I believe and I do believe we can use anti-gravity phenomena, so-called anti-gravity, basically use magnetic repulsion. And if we can knowledge enough to manipulate the structure of the material, the molecular structure, and I do believe we can create anti-gravity effect, which exactly works the same way as superconducting material, but at a room temperature. You just mentioned that we observe this. It is at room temperature. Do you have evidence under room temperature this kind of levitation can work? Yes, I do. And you probably see that evidence too. If you search internet, You look at there's a graphite disc. I actually have that with me. I always demonstrate. If you have a graphite disc, very tiny disc, it's about a fingernail size, a very small disc, and then you put it on top of 4 magnets, 4 square magnets, put on for it flow there. So what
how do you propose that we translate these quantum locking effects at the micro level up to a macro level that we're observing?
Very good question. You mentioned about quantum locking. So that's where we said, superconducting material, it can float on top of a magnetic track, right? So that's where we get quantum locking. Quantum locking is nothing more, just create just a magnetic repulsion force, just that simple.
Mm-hmm. But scaling that up to a macro level is the key.
Yes, now you're talking about you are going too deeper. You are trying to dig out the secret we try to keep. Okay.
I'm always looking for the secrets that they're trying to keep, Doctor.
Yeah, that's right. So I wanted to explain 2 things. One thing is every single particle, we are talking about the electrons and the protons, atoms, even molecules. Everything made by is a composite material of a magnetic particle. So number 1, it has a magnetic field. It is a magnetic field. However, it's composite, is combined them. Number 1. Number 2, so how under superconducting condition, you can have this phenomenon, but in the room temperature, you do not have that phenomenon, right? So yeah.
Unless.
So that's basically how structure works. Under super cold condition, just like a water under cold condition becomes ice, crystallized. For this superconducting material under cold temperature and nearly absolute 0 temperature, magnetized, because everything made by magnetic material, right? Mm-hmm. And under super cold condition, and this material cannot be simply aluminum or steel, because their bonding force too strong and too uniform. So this is material. It's more like ceramic, have a lot of defects in it, right?
Ceramic would have a matte finish, perhaps, in some sense.
Right. And real Earth material, real Earth material, right? So they are loosely binding. So what that means, they can have a mobility under temperature, under cold temperature.
Can I ask you, at the macro level, would quantum entanglement serve the same purpose? If you could somehow, pardon me for using the word mine, or say gather, if you could gather enough quantumly entangled atoms of the same structure, what would you have then? If you had a spheroid made of completely quantumly entangled atoms, what could you do with that?
Let's first solve
everything, I think, right?
Yes. But let's solve first why things can entangle. This is very important.
Please.
Nobody asks. You say somehow they are entangled. How can it entangle remotely? Only magnetic force, electromagnetic force. So that's the force keep them entangled. You learn that they also have a spin, right? Spin direction and spin top and spin down. Whenever entangled one is always spinning opposite. One spin top, the other one down. What that means is always opposite pole. All opposite pole facing each other. So that's why they're entangled. And since the electromagnetic field, you can stretch to say infinity, even though it can be interrupted by something. So then you can say they are loosely entangled over 1,000 miles. Some talking about light years. I do not believe that's possible because of a space filled with objects, right? Could be interrupted by that signal. However, theoretically, if just 2 objects magnetically connected, you can stretch that one. So I hope I answered your entangled object. It's nothing more just electromagnetic effect.
Do you think that those objects needed to be present together at some point to begin their entanglement?
I'm not sure I understand. So understand. You know, things. You know, if you have two objects, if they are close enough, that means they can interact based on the electromagnetic field. They will be entangled in free space. Just like a gravity. Gravity says, oh yeah, you will be attracted. But this is not gravity. Entangled objects always have a direction. Gravity does not have a direction. You can rotate any way you can do. Entangled one has a direction with it, right? You know, spin up and spin down. That's only happen. It is due to magnetic force, because magnetic force has a attraction and a repulsion, create a couple, can fix in certain direction.
Okay, that's an excellent. Thank you. That's an excellent explanation of that. I really appreciate that.
Well, since you already had so many experience or interviewed so many people, so is there any common story about this object? You know, it's driven by intelligent beings or machines, and the material is non-natural. It's some kind of man-made object. Something, you know.
There is an entire spectrum of witness accounts as far as what we can triangulate with radar data, et cetera, in a military fashion, as we discussed earlier. They're all pretty prosaic, but if we take the 70 years of accounts together, we're dealing with some things that appear to manifest themselves as pure energy at some things. And then there are other things that appear to be something we can understand. That's a craft that lands, that has occupants that get out of it. But that's where it breaks down again to only being eyewitness accounts. There are no known photographs that would convince any of us of these things, you know, that any of us currently would look at and believe it. We all would say that's nonsense. So it's such a broad spectrum of things that there are so many things that do correspond across many accounts, but there is almost nothing that corresponds across the entirety of it to me, except possibly a shared medium. So that's why I'm comfortable with words like hyperspace, even though I don't use them too much, but I use it as subspace, hyperspace, or a dimensionality that is not immediately accessible to my senses, might be being utilized by these objects or this technology. But it's so far out of my ability to measure at the moment. I know that ATIP did measure these things with some success, but I think that those of us who are lean towards more science and evidence realize that the methods of collection and some of the systems and means of collection are the things that are the most classified. It's not even necessarily the data. It's just to figure out how to tell people what they found without telling them about the system they found it with.
I've heard it mentioned, I've heard Elizondo mention in interviews that there's some kind of exotic materials that the government has possession of.
Oh,
well, I've been present during one of the meetings where some of that material was reintroduced to the government and to the private sector. It was done by private entities who own the material, and there may be more of that to come in the future. There is speculation around these materials that they're what we call metamaterials. From a few of these incidents, these materials have been collected directly. Some have been collected post-event from the area, but they do seem to share certain characteristics. And there is speculation. I want to be really careful with this, but there's speculation amongst some of the owners that their isotopic values have been misrepresented by entities that have tested them in the past. So we intend to have that testing done in a manner that will be infallible in the future.
What type of properties you're talking about this particular material? Is there anything extraordinary?
In a lot of cases, we're seeing elements that don't play well together, that seem to be nesting within a matrix that doesn't naturally occur. In some cases, this material looks like it must have been, I'm going to say this because it's a modern term and this is my opinion, but 3D printed. Some things appear, I'm told by some folks that these couldn't have been created in anything but a zero-G environment. Now that's all hearsay, and if anybody's going to clip that out as a talking point, it's all hearsay. But it's worth discussing as long as we're going to be serious about it. The question is we're seeing something that along all of these lines has a matrix that would allow for manipulation of the interspaces of the matrix, if that makes sense. They seem to be waveguides.
It can make a perfect sense to me. Have a texture, has a matrix texture. The reason, so when I play this, this magnified disc, put on the top of the magnets, this magnified disc has a lot of textures and the different layers. You can see the layer lighting on has a matrix.
Are you talking about graphite?
Graphite disc, yes. I have I did not have. I can show you that one. And
I think the carbon structure of graphite. I mean, it's only a few iterations below a carbon nanotube, so I can see where that would be an excellent primitive waveguide.
Yes, so the texture may be required. If we can flotate this magnified with a magnetic field, we can float that one at a room temperature. So this is, if anyone interested, you search internet, and you will see that demo. And I purchased that one, so that one. And it doesn't require multi-layers. If single layer will be graphene, right? So multi-layers and oriented certain ways. So in order to have this kind of anti-magnetic field, gravity effect. So I feel this make perfect sense. The material has to be special made and cannot be natural. Natural will be not a unique, or not be repeatable patterns, right? Some kind of
speculate. Mm-hmm. Do you speculate that the anti-gravitic properties are separate from the propulsion?
Oh, yes. See, if we're talking about the propulsion, right now, we're talking about what is a chemical or nuclear or what is a thermonuclear. It's all based on the, say, what is called conservation of linear momentum. It's all based on those kind of propulsion in order to move in the empty space, right? So then you have an ejection of the materials. So these are, so no, I'm not talking about any propulsion system. But initially,
complete reactionless drive. A reactionless.
It's a reactionless. However, NASA even have this kind of research to do a study called a warp drive. It's completely based on electromagnetic. You have to have a power inlet. You have a power source, generate electromagnetic field in order to make a motion. So yes, this one exists. However, I'm even doubted. This kind of, you have to have a external electromagnetic generator. You have to have a generator power in order to generate the field. I'm even doubted about that one because of the travel distance, right? The small, compartment. I would think about it. I would and without any trace, an external structure. I would think about this could be made by just purely materials.
Do you think that for a long time we've especially in this community, the community that extends back towards the stigma, when we talk about things like 0-point energy, if we talk about it in a popular fashion, it should turn a lot of people off. When we think of Pons and Fleischmann and what they've done, what they did with cold fusion and how they all pulled one over on us, in the past, a lot of us are really gun shy to that. But when we start talking about these things, we have to start being serious about them, because we're seeing things that don't appear to be carrying a fuel source, or as you say, have access to an external power source that should allow them to remain on station for 10 to 12 hours around a battle group. So what are they tapping into?
Yes. Tapping into one thing is always there. We say the gravity is over there. Electromagnetic field is always there and always exists in every single materials, including the UFO materials. However, just say, how can you tap into the texture, structure, molecular structure, and a certain texture in order to create a superconducting effect? Mm-hmm. And I believe this is, so in general, I think this can be explained within the realm of physics, three-dimensional space and one-dimensional time. In this, so far, I have not found any need to extend every mystery explanation needs to high dimension or multi-universe. I have not seen anything, need for that one.
I want to take the conversation to a different area then. Where do you propose the Fermi paradox falls short? Why don't we observe, if we're being visited, how come we don't observe anything in the exterior universe around us that would indicate there's anyone else around that's achieved any level of technology?
I would, number one, I believe this event so rare, only you have the luxury, use the state of the art things can detect something, right? Unless what is the Area 51, the UFO, the U.S. government does have that position, right? Unless that one, so I believe the reason is we are still behind. So I believe if these things exist, that means we are still yearly behind the technology they have. Mm-hmm. However, based on my understanding, they are no matter what kind of technology they have or anywhere have in the universe, nothing more go beyond electromagnetic technology. Nothing more go beyond that one.
I tend to agree. I don't think that there's any. I don't believe in. Well, let me put it this way. I don't believe in anything. But I don't put stock in phrases like paranormal, other than they tell us where the edges of our understanding are. Everything we observe is real. Everything in the observable universe, even within consciousness, is real to the individual. The question is how much value it has to the rest of us. So I agree with you in so many ways. I would love to find out that this was a simple explanation, because we have taken the conversation so very far into the esoteric and into science fiction. And most of us, even at the end of the day, question, well, who am I? What am I? What is my place in the universe? What is the psychology? And what does this mean to me? A nuts and bolts prosaic explanation would be wonderful. I disagree with you that it's that simple, but I hope you're right.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Dr. Yu's approach to physics does is using Occam's razor's principle of what is the most simplest explanation. He has a fundamental challenge to what we would call equationism that governs the establishment of physics. Meaning, when you have relativity and you have quantum physics, these things, in some sense, maybe they need to be challenged at the fundamental level. Maybe we don't need to employ wormholes and multiverse and all of these different kind of elaborate explanations for something that could be more explainable if we go back to the drawing board, starting with, like, for example, if you get into even the atomic structure of having monocharged particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, a lot of those things were assumed that you presume that there's a monocharged particle, and you look at the evidence for how did they derive, a singular charged particle, proton, a singular charged particle, electron, and a lot of that is assumption. It's not actually clearly proven in scientific, evidence. So, but see, the problem with science, as we're learning more and more, is that it's more social pressure that governs what's considered unassailable versus actual evidence. And that's kind of where we're coming from here, is that there's so much foundational questions that need to be asked about physics that actually will make it become way more closer to home in terms of understanding how so-called anti-gravity would work. I want to ask about the materials again. I know that's just hearsay, but is there any indication that there was any insignia or symbols or letters on these materials?
Not in any of the material that I've had a chance to examine or come in contact with. That's mostly, I don't mean to disparage anyone, but that's mostly urban myth and legend. That's from anecdotal reports. There's nothing that I'm aware of that exists that shows any kind of indication of a communication system, if that makes sense. I did want to go back and say that I want to make sure that I want to pay the doctor a big compliment and say the first place that we should always start is here on Earth with humans and our technology, and with the simplest, most elegant explanation possible. I absolutely agree with him, regardless of where he points his camera. I think it's the best way to start.
I think he's about to show are you about to show a demonstration, Dr. Yu?
Yes,
excellent.
I'm going to show you. This is called the anti-gravity effect. Are you? Oh, okay. So I have to move this one to here. Okay, let me move this one to here. Did you see this is a 6 magnets, neodymium magnets?
Mm-hmm.
This is a graphite disc. Where is it? Okay. This is a little disc. I want you to see what happens if I put it here. Oh, there's a slope there, so it's not perfectly flat.
Mm-hmm.
So it is sliding down. Okay. Can you see it?
And you're saying that. So those are neodymium magnets, and that is a
Neodymium
graphite disc
with a graphite disc. If I have a piece of paper,
mm-hmm.
we can slide in right a bit, right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, did you see that one?
I do, and I think I know what you're trying to tell me. You're showing me the most primitive and inelegant way of what we're talking about, that the magnetic field changes the waveguide of a carbon structure.
And only this multi-layers carbon disk, this disk, you have the multi-layered, not the single layered. You have the multi-layered and structured a certain way, it can float. And this float is exactly the same thing as a superconducting material float. Mm-hmm. Because a superconducting material, those material does not have this kind of, does not lay it out this way. It has to emerge in the super cold temperature in order to be crystallized, or I would say magnetized to the way it works.
Do the neodymium magnets have a specific frequency we can measure that they are
natural frequency?
That they're applying to the disk?
Oh, okay. Every material has its own natural frequency. We are talking natural frequency is the molecular vibration. This is basically the lattice pattern, natural vibration frequency. So that's what we're talking about. In neodymium material, if you break them, it is just like just like a graphite. If you break them,
mm-hmm.
right,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like just graphite glued together. It's a very rough material. However, it's under super strong magnetic field, aligned the way, created this way to be very strong. I'm not sure if I answer your question.
You did for my purposes. For me to go further with what I want to go study when we get off our call later, yeah.
Can you pull up your camera a little bit, Dr. Yu?
Oh, pull the camera. Okay.
I can't see your face. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There you
Okay.
go.
So now we're back normal. So
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you one thing is, we discussed with Michio Kaku too. He described everything based on the string, based on the one strand of a string, either closed or opened. He tried to use that one to explain all the particles just made a different frequency of a single string, different frequency. Mm-hmm. These are you can never ever demonstrated or proved. You cannot even prove how a vibrating string represents a particle. Mm-hmm. And the different frequency means a different particle. So these things are not settled. Even though physicists do this one, they say, oh, everything come out with energy. So they try to, mm-hmm. We're based on energy. As long as the same energy, we say, oh, that's the particle. That's not the real case. Mm-hmm. Real particle has a mass to it. Physical particle, there's only energy. There's no matter with it. Only use Einstein's mass energy equivalent equation in order to say, oh, matter energy can convert each other. And I disagree. I don't think matter can ever convert it to energy, because energy just part of a motion of matter. So it's not like a separate thing.
Let me ask you a question that's probably not even my right to ask, but do you think that an artificial system can collapse the wavefront?
Oh, okay.
Or does it require a biological observer?
Oh, you are talking about quantum mechanics, fundamental quantum mechanics concept. So it's a so-called probability equation, right? So that's a wave function and create a probability, probability of something. Those are purely abstract concept, have no physical meaning whatsoever. So I do not believe collapse wave function certainly becomes a particle. I believe.
So when we discuss wave or particle, where are we at this very moment with any given system? Wave or particle? How do we determine that?
That's a wrong concept. There is no particle is a wave, and no wave is a particle. So that's how comes out with quantum mechanics. Even Albert Einstein does not believe quantum mechanics. So wave particles. No. All the phenomena you're basically talking about the double slit experiment. The fundamental quantum theory is based on the double slit experiment. Say wave particle traveling like a wave can be under observation becomes collapsed and becomes a particle. And I think the whole foundation, that's a quantum mechanics foundation, wave particle theory, is a completely wrong theory. So that's why physics stopped.
So you feel that there are fundamental areas of physics that aren't even worth spending time on?
You got it, exactly.
Okay, understood. There are a lot of theories that don't play well together. That is a true statement.
I want to ask: is there any evidence or to suggest that whatever these things are, that they have acted differently in response to the 2017 coming out and all this media campaign? Are they showing up more frequently? Are they doing anything different since, is there any response that's been able to be observed perhaps in real time right now, this year, the last year, all this buildup? I mean, it's the talk of the town. The whole world's talking about it. Barack Obama's asked about it on every late night show. It's like, is there any indication that
I get asked a lot about why now? And people ask me, why are things changing and speeding up? And I don't think they are so much as I've been working on this for 4 years now, about 18 hours a day. We don't get paid for what we do. And this is what we do. We some of us formed a company together because we realized as individuals, we couldn't communicate on our own. We couldn't, house ideas and move forward. We were just a bunch of amateurs trying to figure it out. So we got together and tried to help each other. And then we realized everybody always thinks this is a conspiracy. We've got, I could show you years of notes and telephone calls and emails and car trips and failed film ventures and other things to try to communicate this idea. But it wasn't until, well, frankly, it was Lou coming out, and then it was the 60 Minutes episode a few weeks ago that, then the New York Times article, then the 60 Minutes article last week that really kicked us off into the stratosphere. So we're finally here having this conversation. So now people are going to see all kinds of crap happening at once. They're going to be like, oh my God, look at it. It's everywhere. And this guy said he was seeing it every day a couple of years ago. And this guy said this. Hold on a second. Yeah, this is happening. And this is happening at the edges where our battle groups, our naval battle groups are training. And it's happening all over the world. Somebody claimed that I was being alarmist for saying that. Man, this has been happening all over the world for the last 70 years. Don't yell at me in the United States government. Go ask your own darn government what they've been seeing. It's not just like only the US government has access to this. However, lately, I'm getting reports literally 70 miles off the coast right there of my friends and neighbors of saying, why is Joe back already? Well, there was crap flying around their ship out there. And I go, what do you mean there was crap flying around their ship? And they're like, well, they're not supposed to talk about it. They don't know what it was. It's probably that UFO stuff you're dealing with, And so nobody knows why and that's total hearsay. It's not really nice for me to put that in the water, but it's kind of already out there. The ships are coming back. They're anchoring out off the coast of San Diego because they don't know what to do with this yet. And if you get 200 sailors going out on deck recording these UFOs and then coming home, these are my opinions, but how do you control that narrative, that message? If you don't know what to say about it, that's not a comfortable position for anybody to be in. So why? I don't know. It does seem like it's increasing.
So there's an indication that perhaps there is an increase in these appearances to military vessels as a response to the 2017 and now to this time period?
No, I would never conflate a New York Times article with an esoteric technology we're observing. No, there's no connection.
I'm trying to understand if
the focus is on it.
Well, I'm trying to understand if this AI is waiting, or let's assume it's artificial intelligence, and they're waiting for us to get a clue to start paying attention and taking this seriously and being intelligent enough to handle this. And once we do, is the AI, or I'm just, again, this is a hypothesis.
Right.
Is it going to be like, okay, the squirrels are catching up. Let's go ahead and give them a little more cheese to get them on the right path. Like, is that what we're dealing with?
Yeah. I couldn't say. I didn't realize that we were looking at that facet of it. But I mean, the sky. If this is an AI, I don't even want to. I'm not even being a pain in the neck right here. I don't even want to touch that. That's so out of my wheelhouse. Just like with a lot of people are like, well, the extraterrestrials are going to think this and they're going to know that, and I'm like, I can't guess a single motive of an organism that evolved or was created somewhere else than here that isn't me. I have a dog and a cat that have never spoken my name and told me how they felt. So I don't want to guess that these possibly more advanced beings are going to be easy to communicate with.
What would you say to folks?
No,
Go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
What would you say to folks who say, well, the government has lied to us so many times about everything, why should we trust this? What if this is just some kind of, campaign to raise funds for Space Force or military industrial complex? They need to, get a new attention campaign going. That's a common thought when you hear this talked about is the government's lied to us habitually. This is just another, why should we believe them? We'd be abused. It's like an abused person going back and listening to the same lie again, now that they're saying that this is real.
Okay, so let's blow smoke up each other's butts with this one. That's all correct. They're right. Now, where are you going to go with that? The same government is going to tell you that you got to pay your taxes, that you got to drive in between the lines on the road, and that you got to follow these other lines. This is the world we live in. This is our society. If we're going to live in a society where we just choose not to believe the people in charge, why are they still in charge? So there's a lot of questions here to bring up besides why should we believe anyone? I'm not asking anybody to believe me. We're trying to bring evidence to the table, put it on the table, and literally back away from it and go, y'all figure it out with us. Nobody's trying to tell anybody how to think, at least not where I'm coming from. the UAPTF has been tasked to find out what we know, not tell us what to think. The Department of Defense Inspector General even went, oh, y'all are going to try to figure out what's going on? Well, we're going to investigate you while you're doing it because this is a weird subject. These are all the right things to be happening right now. I don't think people at home should be believing anyone. I think people should get online, do their own research. And man, that's a dangerous thing to say because there's a lot of people who think doing research means confirmation bias, and it doesn't. Research means go find out what you want to believe first. Go check it all out. Now go find out the opposition and find out what they believe and don't discount it. You have to take all of it together and stand in the middle of it and try to figure it out. That's what science is. You know, observationally, data collection and the scientific method is about, look, when someone, if you wanted to see a rabbit and you don't ever see a rabbit, don't tell us there's a rabbit. Tell us you're still looking for rabbits. So if that makes sense. So I want us to all be really careful, man. That's why people in ufology, they're not sure about me right now, I don't think, because I come out and say, I want to kill ufology. I want to see I want to see ufology die. It's not a ology. It's not a curriculum. It's an amateur boosted idea that we need to give to science. But the folks are right. This is a subject we have been lied to about. Straight up, capital L, lied to. The reasons behind that, we don't know yet, man. I think it's because it's complicated answers with no clear answers and probably some really bad decisions in the past in regards to this. But whether the doctor's right about the technology we're talking about, or whether my ideas are right, or whether it's a completely earthbound, esoteric, near-peer technology that we're dealing with, it's certainly at our front door right now. And there's nobody selling a threat narrative. We're just saying, everyone, please take a look with us.
When you hear another common argument, like Elon Musk, the graph about, photograph technology, it's advancing exponentially over the years, and then the photographs of the UFO quality are always flatlined, Is there any indication that there are that graph is going to have a change soon, in the sense that we're going to get better?
To me, there is just because, well, guess what? Photos get better as time goes by. All the photos have gotten better as time goes by. We didn't have any gun camera footage of the quality we have now back in the 60s because those gun cameras didn't exist in the same fashion they did. Look, just like I'm answering, you guys with my opinion and everything else, I think Elon gets caught answering with his opinion. And as the CEO of the only rocket company on the planet that really matters at the moment, I think he has a lot at stake for making sure that when his stuff finally gets to Mars, there ain't somebody waiting there for him laughing at him. So there's one way for him to go at this. But Elon's not someone I go to as an expert on UAP, because
I think the horse and buggy manufacturers had problems with those automobiles too.
Yeah, no, I mean, hey, man, it seems to happen every time. So I don't blame him if as his cost, as his cost to benefit ratio starts climbing, that he really wants this to work out perfectly. But I'm just making a joke here. This is weird, man. There's never been a time ever before that the three of us could have been in a room and had a serious conversation about this. And the fact that over the last couple of weeks, and first of all, the last couple of years, Lou's been on the news, and him and Chris have been talking about this. And then Chris Mellon, in the last few weeks, the three of us have been going on it, and the pilots are getting involved now. People are like, why now? It's like, man, we took forever to get here. You're finally listening to us. How long can we have this conversation? I think it's going to be permanent now. And I don't care if I'm right. I don't even want to be right. I just want all of us to not be afraid to talk about this anymore. And for some reason in the past, yeah.
Well, I think the number one priority should be, whatever these things are, we need to get a hold of one of these things and figure out how to use this technology.
Yes, we want the truth. Yeah. We want the facts. We do not have an alternative.
That's what this should, I feel like America's stagnating, and it's like, it's kind of ironic that they keep showing up whenever we're going off to another war, and it's like, maybe it's time to rethink our inks about what we're doing to advance society forward. And get back to that ingenuity, that spirit, that American spirit of innovation. I mean, it's like, I hate this mentality that we've reached the end of history and all we're doing now is trying to redistribute all the loot that we've accumulated over the decades and just shuffle it off in a different direction. I hate that spirit. That's totally antithetical to American spirit. We should be looking at this stuff with courage and saying, you know, whatever this is, if this is a animal or if this is technological, whatever it is, we need to get a hold of it and figure out how it's doing what it's doing. You know what I mean? And
well, I tell you, that's our goal. One of the things that me and my colleagues talk about the most is, number one, harm reduction. We want to improve quality of life across the board for everyone. That's not just national, that's international and global. We want to help take what we have learned and seen of this technology and apply it across the globe. This is, in no way is this a bipartisan or excuse me, let me correct that. In no way is this a partisan subject. This is a completely non-partisan subject. At no point can we politicize this. It's fine for groups to say, we're interested in this part, we want to curate it, we want to help with it, it's important to us. And that's fine. But at no point can this be made a new arms race. At no point can this be made the new moral compass. This is brand new if we're going to look at it in the open. And whatever the physics, the morals, the psychology, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, we have to do it together. I mean, with a completely daylight approach. And I'm one of those people who often talks about the fact that, like, things like chemical weapons should be, you know, kept secret. Those recipes should not be on the street for people to develop. And I'm sure there's aspects of this technology that could be destructive, and they should be curated by trusted agents. But everything else, I mean, we're talking, with this level of technology, you're going to tell me that desalinization is a problem? I don't think so. Because the only problem with desalinization is power generation. The rest of it's just academic. So whether we're talking about power production, water production, which are really the mainstays of safety for a human. If you can produce water and power, you can do anything they need after that. We may finally be here where we can take care of everyone. We should stop being greedy about that.
that's the problem, though. I mean, I'm just going to get political just myself here. I am a talk radio host. So I do think the problem with this is that if this is a man-made technology or whatever it is, the government has an incentive, the way it's structured, to not share this information with the public because their clients demand a different type of service. You know, the clients that staff the bureaucracies at every level demand, they make too much money with their horse and buggies. Let's put it that way. And they don't want to, you know, and unfortunately we're in a plutocracy, a kleptocracy, or whatever you want to call it, where, you know, there are people who have, you know, financial investments in the revolving door relationships of DC. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think a lot of people, I'm just telling you, I think a lot of people in the heartland and everybody are saying, I just can't believe that a government that sells it, that, I mean, I know this is a cynical perspective, but it's a reality perspective. A government that prints money out of thin air and helps corporate clients for whatever their interests are would suddenly reveal technology that would alleviate a lot of the scarcity that people are in bondage to around the world. And that's the big elephant in the room politically that I think people have a hard time wrapping their mind around. Wait a second. The same 4 TV company stations are now talking about this. The same ones that, like,
well, they're the only 4.
Right.
Yeah. It's a two-sided coin, because there's I'm with you, because it's the same argument across the board. There's the why now. And then, of course, there's my argument that we've been working at this forever. But the perception of why now seems like a why now if you weren't working on it. And all of I'm with you, man. These things, our perception of the way our society runs is pretty darn skewed right now. There's no room. Look, I should have never went in the military. Okay, I'm an artist. I'm a musician, an artist, a writer. I'm not an authoritarian. It almost killed me. I had a heart attack when I was 37. It was so antithetical to the person that I am inside. And it's taken me every moment since I retired to become more of who I think I am inside. And while that's a metaphysical statement, we don't live in a world where you have a lot of choice to choose who you're going to be, how you're going to be, what path you will go after. And our politics are so polarized right now that you can't point at anything and have it look positive to the opposition. If I were to point out the fact that our roads, our military, our water systems, and all of those other things are socialism, I'll immediately get a portion of the crowd who wants to leave the conversation because they're not having it. They're not going to mess with socialism. If I go to another portion of the crowd and I talk to them about the financial incentives in their neighborhoods and their cities and the way it's enriching their communities, and then I call it capitalism, they're going to get the hell out because they're offended by these systems. These disparate systems make up our society, and all of these different ideas make up our society. If we're not willing to change, if we're not willing to at some point stand up as a collective and say this isn't good enough anymore, and so I'm not talking about some global revolution, but I am talking about a paradigm shift. It's time to, if there's enough for everybody, it's time for the rest of us to say so and to say, hey, no offense to billionaires, I guess, but you can have, how about 1 billion, not 19? And there's people who are like, well, they should have whatever they want. And I notice the only people that are cheering for that are people that are in an absolute lack of resources, that are wishing for resources. And they're seeing themselves in these high stations and saying, well, if you take away those stations, I'll never be able to attain that myself. Well, maybe if we lower and raise the bar at the same time with our quality of life across the board with this technology, that we'll have a heck of a lot more choice. And I don't know, man, I could be on my soapbox all night. Politics is not my thing, but I don't think this is politics. To me, these are human rights.
You've certainly raised a lot of fascinating things. Dr. Yu, any thoughts as we conclude?
It's
or questions?
Very, very insightful discussion. So I'm very impressed, and we actually share so many comments, just like you said, right? So, wow, well, maybe in the future we can cooperate in certain ways.
Yeah. Well, I learned a lot tonight. I appreciate you guys.
Well, I really appreciate you. Knowing what you've been investigating now and what you saw with your own eyewitness and everything you're at, and this is the biggest story in the world right now, and you're in the middle of it. Like, what's your overall temperament about the future?
Humans complicate things. They're the only folks we know that we've dealt with so far, and they're a pain in the ass every time I bump into them. But I'm trying to be funny here, but I worry about, because we live in a complicated world that still has a very dynamic geopolitical situation, that we have adversaries and even not necessarily allies out there who might want to spoof this technology and this phenomenon to destabilize things and to make things more complicated in certain theaters. To me, it's really important that and I don't like this phrase because I want to see an end to war, but I'd like to see our modern warfighter be trained to tell the difference between a phenomena of the 5 observables that may be aloof to the entire operation that he's involved in, and the possible spoofing of an enemy or another terrestrial entity that wants to destabilize the situation. Because if someone wants to pretend to be this phenomenon, this may create an entire situation that we've never looked for. Because I know people ask me all the time, why didn't you guys shoot them down? Why don't you shoot at them? Why don't you do this? Number one, they're not being aggressive to us. And number two, the United States military doesn't normally shoot without asking questions first. I know we've never been perfect, but that's not what we do. We don't just shoot crap out of the sky. We gauge its intentions and try to maintain, peace and equilibrium. So
typically we offer foreign aid, and if that doesn't work, then we'll shoot them out of the sky. But
I get how people feel the way they do, but this isn't what I thought. It's not a movie, and it's not an operation, and it's not just popping off now because Joe Biden's the president or anything else. It took us a long time to get here, and it's going to take us a long time to figure this out.
And I want to know, just off the top of my head, why is it that, if these things are so advanced in their transportation, how did they get materials off of them? Like, how in the heck, if you're that good if you have technology that advanced, what did you do? Clip a tree? I mean, seriously, how in the world did you get how do people get materials from these craft if they're that advanced, they should know how to fly I'm just thinking out loud here. How in the world that happens?
Well, I can give you a few examples. On the one hand, some of these things, when they seem to translate in, seem to drip material off of them and be ablating material off of their shells. And some people have went and retrieved that. Now, whether those people are being honest with what they've observed and then what they retrieve, that remains for the labs to find out. But those we have, pardon me for saying I don't have any on my hard drive to send you or anything like that, but we have a lot of video of what look like flare. A lot of people immediately dismiss them as flares. Okay. And as someone who's been around a lot of flares before, they do kind of look like flares, but they're not all flares in all instances, just like all bright lights in the sky aren't Venus or aircraft or things like that. So in the cases where these all fit the paradigm, those substances, those materials exist in, at least I know of 5 or 6, 7 places, in private and corporate hands. So there's people that have shot at them. I know somebody that shot at them with a firearm and something came off of them and they claim to have kept it. And there are other people that have gone out to famous crash sites after the fact. And I don't want to talk about what the substances are made of because I don't want to start some kind of nonsense gold rush to go look for stuff. But they believed that after the fact, they realized what they were looking for and they had determined a means to find it in the air. So for lack of a better word, they figured out what kind of metal and how to detect it. How's that? And they went out and they were able to detect it and retrieve a portion of it and then go have it tested. And so I want to say all that. And then I want to say that how many hundred thousands of cars crashed that last year? How many aircraft crashed last year? And now I want you to consider a couple of brown bears going, oh, those things never crash, man. There's no way you're ever going to find a piece of one of those flying things out there because that technology is way past us. Dude, all technology fails and all biological beings are fallible. So it doesn't bother me that these crash, that they drop pieces off of them. Other people speculate that these are being delivered to us. I mean, if someone said to me, hey, Sean, deliver this car to that primitive village over there by crashing it into their church, I'm going to ask for a different way to do this. Can I park it in their parking lot and leave it overnight? Can I do I have to crash it? So I don't know. Again, I'm applying human motives to a possibly non-human situation.
Well, it's been a real pleasure and delight to speak with you, and you've given us more things to think about than most interviews. So really appreciate your time, and I do want to stay in touch with what you're doing, and we'll be excited to see what happens with this June report. Is it only going to be dealing with what ATIP has recorded, or is it beyond that, the scope of this Pentagon report?
Well, the Congress has ordered the UAPTF to provide them all information on unidentified aerial phenomena that has been collected within the United States government, period. The question is how many of the stovepipe entities within the government that have worked on this are actually going to take that seriously? At the moment, I'm hearing that not many, but we'll see what the news cycle is going to do and the IG does to help that along.
Thank you so much for your time, Sean Cahill. It's a real pleasure, and I do want to recommend, is there any website or that gets collecting this information for people to digest in a simple way? Or
I don't believe there's a repository for it yet. Very soon there will be one, I believe under the UAPTF, hopefully. And if not, my company will at least be providing some educational outreach to folks ahead of time if that's not possible. I would say my website is mintyhyperspace.com. But that's just my personal, some of the podcast things I've done and some other articles I've written.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was really great talking to you both.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you.